So I've had a lot going on over the last few months, and about probably January or so, I was meeting with the young adults and the college-age students, and we decided that we were going to go through the book of Revelation. And so we got through about 6 chapters before summer hit. And it was good. It was really interesting. We were kind of digging into it, getting to know some different things about some of the things that we see in the book of Revelation. And always when we talk about end time stuff, it raises a whole lot of alarms for many of us, especially if you've grown up in the church. We've seen churches split. If you've been around church a long time, people split over their idea of what's going to happen. And so we kind of talked about that as a group, and we were kind of trying to piece together some things and try to take it as objectively as we could. And then over the past few months, I've had these events in my life called weddings. And I know they don't seem to match, but I'll explain how they connect here in a second. And I had a wedding just before VBS that Lori and I were invited to. A previous high school student was marrying one of our state representatives in Amarillo, and we're like, well, okay, we'll go. And so that was fun. And then we came back and did VBS. And the following week, I did the wedding for Camber Van Dyke and her husband, Garrett. And so got a chance to kind of take them through some stuff. And so I had been thinking about wedding stuff. And in the middle of all of that, my daughter, Abby, decided to run out and get engaged. And then in the middle of that, they said, well, instead of just making an engagement party, family get together, let's just do a wedding in Yellowstone. And so I have had wedding on the brain for quite a while, and this end time stuff. In fact, probably for this whole series that we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about some end time stuff over the next few weeks. This has probably been in the works for probably 4 or 5 years. Because I think God is stirring something in our culture, and he's trying to raise the alarm in certain things in our lives that we need to notice. And it's interesting, whenever Jesus seems to talk about, as I've studied, as he talks about end times, it's very interesting that he uses a lot of wedding language within that. He also oftentimes follows up with some type of parable or something that has to do with a wedding. He talks about him being the groom and the church being the bride. And it always seems to be connected around these thoughts of, well, when is the end? When is it all going to get fixed back to the way it was supposed to be in the garden? And so then I started thinking about, well, if and I remember I've talked with the elders about this a few times, like, hey, when is it, should we do this? Should we not do this? All that kind of stuff. Because there's all kinds of controversy that kind of follows it. And one of the things that I started thinking about was like, well, when is a good time of year to talk about this? And I was thinking about August. August, we almost every year for the last 8 years, we have focused on what our vision is as a church, what our mission is as a church. And we talk about it in different ways. We use different phrases, but it's very simple. We do what every church is supposed to do. We just want to introduce people to Jesus. And so I was thinking about all these things, putting all these things together, and a few months ago, it just seemed to fit together. That why can't we see the signs of the times, connect that with weddings, I know that's weird, and have this idea of, well, what are we supposed to do about it? And so with that, I kind of started digging in a little bit. And I started seeing that there's something that Jesus does when he talks about it. He doesn't necessarily give a lot of, well, this is the moment that you will know. He kind of does that, and we'll talk about that. But really, what he is saying is, you need to be ready because the end is near. And he says that many times. And so, that should spark with us that if we're going to talk about end time stuff, we need to understand that we could get into the weeds of theologizing what we think is going to happen, what the markers are, how we think it's all going to work together. The problem with that is we really don't know. And the reason we don't know is because Jesus says he didn't even know. And if Jesus, the Son of God, said, I don't even know the day or the hour, that's for the Father to know, then what makes us think we could? So there's something else to why Jesus talks about it. There's something else to it. In fact, Paul, he gave a marker. This is a very general marker. We're going to come back to this passage later on. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, Paul says this. He says, let me get it here. Let me pull it up here. He says this, 2 Timothy 3:1. He says, but know this, hard times will come in the last days. Okay, Paul, thanks. How many of us this week had some hard days? Well, you're at the end. Now, really, what is Paul saying? What does this mean? What does this look like? And so I think what we're going to begin to see is that we're going to see some very loose descriptors. And we will be able to tie these descriptions into different things that maybe are even happening in our culture. I'm going to take you over the next few weeks into some really interesting, probably some not super deeply studied scriptures that help us understand what end times kind of looks like, or what we need to be ready for. How do we get ready? Because that's what Jesus is telling us to. He's saying to be ready. He's not worried about us being able to predict it. He's worried about us being prepared for it. And so we need to find the solutions in the Bible to answering the question we have, like, when is the end coming? And so I think one of the best ways to do it is illustratively, is to give us a word picture. And you got to understand, the reason why Jesus uses weddings is because it was a very symbolic thing that happened in the culture. Everybody knew how a wedding worked. They knew just how it went together. It's different than it is for us today. So let me walk you through the wedding of the Old Testament, New Testament, of the first century Jewish wedding, because he uses the concept of that to give us some clues as to how to be ready and what to be ready for. All right, so let me walk through this with you very quickly. First of all, you need to understand that the bride was chosen by the groom's father. It began with the father of the groom choosing somebody to be the bride, and then they would go to the bride's family and present them a letter. They would present them they would make a covenant. They would offer a sacrifice for that bride to become the bride of the groom. I want you to start connecting some dots a little bit as I walk through this. Who was the sacrifice for the bride in the New Testament? Jesus. Jesus was a sacrifice. So, let me go to the second step. When an agreement had been made between the bride and the groom and the families, the groom would then offer the bride gifts. Jesus, when we agreed to become his bride as a Christian, as a follower of Christ, he's given us spiritual gifts. See some connections? Next, they would take a cup, and they would pour wine into the cup, and they would share the cup together. They would both drink from it. And it was a marker, it was a moment that was meant to remind the bride, because there's going to be a moment when the groom was going to leave and the bride would have to remember the groom. And so it was meant to be a reminder, and every time she drank wine from that cup or any cup, she would remember the sacrifice that the groom and his father had made for her, and she would stay faithful to the groom because of that sacrifice and because of that remembrance. What did we just participate in this morning? Communion. At that moment, they are considered married. But there are three things that they have not been able to do yet that would constitute for us today a true marriage. There were three things that were accepted. By all legal terms, they were married. They were remember when Joseph finds out that Mary is pregnant, and it says that he was betrothed to her? They were actually married at that point. He was just preparing, we'll talk about this, he was just getting the place ready for her. So that's why he was wondering whether he should divorce her or not. They were already legally married. So at this point, they're considered married, but there's three things they don't get to do that married couples get to do. First of all, they weren't going to live together. In fact, they weren't going to see each other for a period of time. And they would not consummate the marriage. If you don't know what word consummate is, ask somebody who is a little older than you and can tell you that word, because it's a little awkward, all right? But we know what that probably means, right? So they are together by every sense of the word except for in those three things. The groom would leave, and he would look at the bride, and he says, I'm going to go to prepare a place for you. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? See, the groom would go back to the father's house, and he would build an expansion onto the house, a room, a place for him and his bride to live. And so he'd go prepare that place together. Remember, Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you. In the meantime, the bride, she's preparing herself for being married. She would leave, after this moment, the groom leaves, she would go to a mikveh and she would ceremonially dip herself, immerse herself in clean, living water as a public statement that she is now married to the groom, which sounds an awful lot like baptism, doesn't it? Then she would begin to prepare herself, getting her stuff together, getting the things together, getting her family, spending time with her family, making sure her family knows how much she loves them, all these kind of things. And then she would begin to make her wedding gown. We'll talk about that in a second. Okay, let me stop for a second because I've unloaded a bunch of stuff on you. When we're talking about end times, this is the moment that we're at. We are the bride, and we are to prepare ourselves for the groom to return. All right? We're going to come back to all of that in a second. But let me continue on with what goes on next. The groom would go and start preparing the place, and it would be the groom's father who would decide when it was time to go get the bride, when the place was ready. Remember, Jesus says this thing. He says, I don't even know the day or the hour, but my Father knows when I'll return. When all was ready, according to the groom's father, he would send the groom to snatch away the bride in the middle of the night. That sounds a little creepy, but it was an expectation. He would go to take her away in the middle of the night. Remember, Jesus said this weird thing, goes, my return will be like a thief in the night. Kind of the same language, right? And so the groom would be told to go get her. And so the groom would gather his groomsmen, the rest of his wedding party, his attendants, and they would grab torch lights because you got to light up the darkness, right? And they would go to the place where the bride was, and just before they entered, they would blow a trumpet, a shofar, to announce the arrival of the groom. When you think about rapture stuff, when you look in Revelation, you'll see some hints at a trumpet blowing, the sound of a shofar. The bride during this time has been preparing bridesmaids. She's been getting her bridesmaids ready. They were usually, normally they needed to be people who were, young women who were not married yet, virgins. And they were to prepare to help the bride get everything ready. And one of the things they had to do is they had to get lamps, and they had to make sure that there was enough light for the groomsmen and the groom to find the bride and to be able to get out of town and to celebrate as they leave, and then also go with them. And so they would need light because it's going to happen in the middle of the night. So what would happen is they would get everything ready, and then they would watch for the groom to arrive. And when the groom arrived, they would shout and celebrate as the bride is being taken away, right? Then, this last part, when the groom and the bride got to the father's house, they would go into the house and they would be in that room for 7 days. They would not come out. They would be in that house, in that room for 7 days, and at the end of the 7 days, they would come out and there would be this huge celebration and dancing because the marriage has been consummated. They are now living together, and they have finally seen each other. And that period of time between when he left and when he came to get her, they would not look at each other or see each other. It feels like that's the area we're in. We don't get to see Jesus. We're just waiting for him to show up. And so, if that's how it all kind of comes together, and if Jesus keeps using this kind of language, then how do we know how close we are? I want you to take your Bibles, and we're going to go to Matthew chapter 24. It looks like there's a big section we're going to cover, but we're going to go through this incredibly fast. And so I'd encourage you to come back and study some of this so that you kind of know what we're talking about, and you can kind of dig in, kind of do your own homework a little bit, kind of do some study on this. We're going to look at Matthew chapter 24 this morning. Now, you have to understand as we walk into this that just before this, Jesus has called out the religious leaders. He has pointed out that they don't even realize who they should know. They're the ones who've studied the scriptures. They're the ones who've studied the Old Testament. They're the ones that knew the prophecies about the coming Messiah inside and out. And yet here's Jesus right in front of them and they can't even see it. So his disciples, Jesus' disciples, they're kind of in the same boat. They've studied, they've heard, they know the prophecies about from Zechariah and Daniel and Isaiah and all these different individuals in the Old Testament. And so they're kind of putting the piece together and they're like, well, wait a minute, we think Jesus is the Messiah, but he's saying all these guys have missed the signs. We don't want to miss the signs. Jesus, we know there's certain things that are supposed to take place and they haven't taken place yet. Are the prophets wrong or are we wrong? And so they say, how do we know that the end is near? In fact, they say it right there, starting in verse 3, it says, while they're sitting on the mountain of Olives, his disciples approached him and said, tell us when all these things will happen, and what is the sign of your coming and the end of the age? So they're wondering, okay, Jesus, we don't want to miss it. So what do we do? So this is where I want us to begin to pick up. Starting in verse 5, look at what Jesus says. And as we're reading this, I want you to think about, are there any hints in our culture, in our time today, that seem to indicate that this is happening? All right? You have to understand, when there's a prediction in the Bible, sometimes it's one specific event, and sometimes it can be multiple. It can happen over and over and over a few different times. There's certain ones that kind of fit that, all right? And a lot of the end time stuff, how many of us have thought Jesus was going to come back because things got so bad at one point? I mean, talk to each generation, and each generation said, he's come back before my generation. And we see it, right? We see all these things. We can see all these things throughout history. I want us to just look at our day and age today and see if you see any markers. Follow with me, starting in verse 5. For many will come in my name, in Jesus' name, saying, I am the Messiah, and they will deceive many. Right now, there are about... studies and research tells us that there's anywhere from 7 to 10 individuals who are calling themselves the Messiah and have disciples and telling people that they're Messiah and trying to convince people they're Messiah right now today. That's been happening for years. It's been happening since Jesus left. So, not a big thing, but that's a thing. It's still happening today. Go on to verse 6. He says this. You are going to hear of wars and rumors of wars. Sound familiar? See that you are not alarmed. That's important. Jesus is not trying to scare the disciples and freak them out. He's like, don't be scared. Don't freak out. There's some good things coming. You need to be ready. Look at what he says. Because these things must take place, but the end is not yet. So they said, well, when do we know is the end? He said, well, it's not yet. You're going to hear wars and rumors of wars. He goes on in verse 7. For nation will rise up against nation. Sounds familiar. Kingdom against kingdom. Yeah, check. There will be famines. Okay. Earthquakes. We just had an earthquake, in Borger a few days ago? That's weird. In various places. Borger seems like a various place. And all these events are the beginning of labor pains. We got a couple ladies who are getting ready to have a baby. And so there's this thing that happens that it's just the beginning of labor pains, like when you kind of know. Basically what Jesus is saying is like, when you start seeing these things, it means, hey, there should be an alarm going off when you start to notice these things kind of occurring a little bit more often. And the more often they occur, maybe you need to make even more alertedness towards that. So he goes on. Jesus goes on, and he says this in verse 9. Then they will hand you over to be persecuted, and they will kill you. And you will be hated by all nations because of my name. So I want to kind of set this up so that it makes sense. Jesus is, first of all, talking to disciples who are Jews. And so in one side of what Jesus is saying, what he's saying is that people, it'll seem like everyone is turning against Jewish people, to you, the Jews. But I want you to notice some words that he used here. He said that they will hand you over to be persecuted and they will kill you. You will be hated by all nations because of my name. When people who are Christians are being hated more openly, that's a warning sign. just take 5 minutes and do a quick Google search. What do people today think about Christians? And you're going to be shocked. Christians are not liked people. Jesus says that when those things start happening, an alarm should start going off. Look at this. Jump down to verse 14. It's not meant to scare you. Listen, this good news, it's good news. It's a good thing. Because what's going to happen is as that persecution picks up, people are going to see the truth for what it is. They're going to be changed by the gospel because the Christians, the people who are followers of Christ, are living out the gospel. They are staying faithful in spite of the persecution, in spite of the way that the world or their culture is looking at them and treating them. Right now, there's a lot of Christians being killed in Africa. And yet, that is the place where most people are becoming Christians every day. Persecution only stirs it up. It only makes it better. So he says this good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed to all the world. Think about the technology we have today. We've always talked, I remember growing up in church when I was especially younger, hearing that there are so many places that the gospel hasn't reached. There's very few places left that the gospel hasn't reached. And most of that is because we have amazing missionaries who are going into those places where no one wants to go, where no one's heard the gospel, and they're finding these people and they're presenting the gospel. But we also have technology that can share the gospel with anyone at any time, and all they have to do is pick up their phone. He goes on. He says, proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. The end will follow. He goes on and he talks about how the earth seems to just be shaking, that everything seems to be falling apart, that it seems to get darker and darker. Our culture, our American culture, seems to become more darker and darker in terms of sin. It feels like sin is celebrated instead of people being ashamed of it. It seems like it's excused and it's just kind of swept under the rug instead of maybe I shouldn't do that. He goes on and he talks about some other things that will take place. Jump down to verse 29. And immediately after the distress of those days, so there'll be a whole lot of distress. I believe we are living in a lot of distress right now. But that's just my perspective, and that's just what I've sensed. It feels like it's more difficult now than it used to be. Every generation has thought the same thing. But look what he says. Immediately after those days of distress, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not shed its light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. That seems pretty intense. I don't know how literal that is. I don't know if that's metaphor for something. Jesus is telling us that not to try to figure that out. He just wants us to know that it's the darkest time in the entire world. That when the end comes, everything is going to fall apart. Jump down to verse 31. And then the Son of Man will come. He will send his angels with a loud trumpet. That sounds like something that happens with the groom's attendants, doesn't it? And they will gather his elect. His elect are who? The church, Christians, the bride. From the four winds and from one end of the sky to the other, from everywhere. And then he uses some more wedding language. Look at verse 36. Now concerning that day or hour, no one knows, neither the angels of the heaven nor the Son, except the Father alone. Yeah? And then finally jump down to verse 44. This is why you are also to be ready. Because of all this, you need to be ready. Because the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. If that doesn't stir something in you, some excitement, not fear, if there's a fear factor building up inside you, like you're worried you're going to miss out on something you're not going to notice, we're going to talk about how to be ready in a second. But if that's you, then it might mean that the Spirit is stirring something inside of you to nudge you along so that you can be ready. But if you're ready, you're excited. You can't wait. I was talking to my dad this week, and he made a comment to me. He said, there are moments when we're just ready to go home. We're just ready for Jesus to come back. And I remember them saying that when I was younger, and it really didn't make sense. But the older that I've gotten, and the more that we experience, and the more that we see in the world around us, I get it. The things around us should not frighten us. They should excite us. Because it just means Jesus is coming. And we need to be ready. See, Jesus is telling them to be ready. And right after this, look at chapter 25. We're going to go to this in a second. Jump over to verse 25. He tells a parable. We're not going to read the whole parable. I'll explain it to you, and we're going to look at one verse in it. So Jesus tells this parable about, some of your versions might say the 10 virgins. It's really bridesmaids. The proper translation of that word is actually bridesmaids, but it doesn't make sense in our culture, and so we change it to make it make sense. But it actually means to have 10 bridesmaids. And basically, the story goes this way, the parable goes this way, that there's these 10 bridesmaids. They're supposed to be ready and watching for the groom. 5 of them are wise, and they're preparing. They're getting their oil ready. They're getting all the things ready that they're supposed to. 5 of them are foolish, and they just kind of keep putting off being ready. And then all of a sudden, the groom shows up, and the 5 that aren't ready are freaking out. They're not ready. They don't have oil in their lamps. They're not going to be able to follow the groom to where the bride is going. But the 5 that are ready, and they're like, hey, we can't give you any because we were prepared. We were ready for this. And if we give you some, we won't be able to go. You had a responsibility. You were to be ready. You're not ready. I can't help you. I can't help people be ready for Jesus. I can give some instruction. I can give some pointers. I can give some ideas. We'll talk about that. But I can't make you be ready. You have to make the decision to be ready. And that's what the bridesmaids are telling them. And so the 5 get to experience the wedding. The other 5 don't. Have you ever wondered why Jesus did 5 and 5? Why didn't he do like, if I was Jesus, I would have, and I knew who Judas was, I would have been, there's 12 bridesmaids, and 11 of them are ready, and one of them is not. And I would kind of give a little look to Judas. Why did he say 5 and 5? I don't know if this is true, but if you kind of do some study and some research, you'll find that between Pew Research, Barna, and a few others, if you talk to different pastors, the general number that kind of gets thrown around, if you ask how many of the people in your congregation are ready for Jesus, it's normally right around anywhere from 40 to 60%, right around 50%. Is it any wonder that Jesus uses 5 and 5? Could he be indicating something? Could he be telling us something? That some people are going to think they're ready, and they've been selected as bridesmaids, but they don't do what they need to do to be ready. Look at what he says in Matthew chapter 25, verse 13. Therefore, this is going to sound familiar, be alert, because you don't know either the day or the hour. That should trigger something in us. That should stir something in us. Jesus says we don't know the day or the hour. We can't predict it. It's not about predicting it. But we can know that when we see these things happening, it means you better start getting ready. You better start getting prepared. You start getting your things together. You need to stay alert. Staying alert for a bride was she needed to stay pure. She needed to stay faithful to her husband. She needed to remember what the groom had paid for, the sacrifice he had paid for their relationship. And then she got things ready. She would begin to make her dress. I want to show you something really cool. Jump over to Revelation chapter 19. So, not to get into all of the dynamics of it, but this is the end. This is when the celebration is happening. This is when, if you want to use the wedding terminology, and it's used here, it's the celebration. The two have spent their 7 days together, and they are coming out, and now there's this big celebration. Everyone that's there is celebrating. Look at what Jesus has John write. Chapter 19, verse 8. The bride, she was given fine linen to wear, bright and pure. verse 7. Let us be glad, rejoice, and give him glory because the marriage of the Lamb has come and his bride has prepared herself. How did she prepare herself? She was given fine linen to wear, bright and pure. For the fine linen represents the righteous acts of the saints. Okay, here we go. Who are the saints? It's us. It's people that are Christians. It's not people who did really good as a Christian. It's us as Christians. Paul says that we are saints. If you have accepted Christ in your life, you are a saint. How did the bride prepare herself? Righteous acts. By obeying and preparing. So how do I, as a saint, what righteous acts do I do in order to be ready? Well, first of all, we know it. We obey God, right? Obey his word. Prepare ourselves. Work on the areas of our lives that we need to get better at. Remove some of the things that are going to get in the way of our relationship with Christ so that when he comes back, not that we're perfect, not that we've got it all figured out, but so that we have been being prepared, that we've been preparing ourselves as well. You see, it feels like so many of the prophecies that we're going to look at over the next few weeks are somehow surfacing. And as we do this question will continue to stir. If this is it, this is the question we're asking. If this is the end, if the end is near, what do we do now? What do I specifically do? And I want to take you to one last passage, 2 Corinthians. I know there's a lot of scripture this morning, but I want to take you to 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Let's kind of put all the pieces together. There's a whole lot of things going on in our world. There's a whole lot of natural disasters, a whole lot of earth-shaking things, right? There's wars and rumors of wars, right? There's all kinds of things going on. Christians are being hated more and more. The Israelite people seem to be surrounded by all kinds of enemies. It's building. The earth is shaking. It's moving towards. These are the labor pains, as Jesus would put them. I'll give you another illustration. Maybe this will make sense. Let's imagine it's about 11 o'clock at night. You go to bed. You're almost completely asleep. You're in that really good moment of sleep. And all of a sudden, the smoke alarm in your house starts going off. What do you do? Well, one, it's really hard to ignore. They're usually pretty loud, right? If you haven't changed the batteries, you weren't prepared. So, alarm's going off, right? And so what do? You get up and you go look. You look for evidence. And if there's smoke, what do? You gather your family and you get out, right? The smoke alarm is going off is what Jesus is saying. Are you going to just ignore it? Hope it turns off on its own? Or are you going to do what every single person would ever do when they smell smoke, when they hear the alarm, they get up and they start to get ready and they get the people out? So as we look at this passage, I want to remind us what the big thought is here. Is that this kind of stuff is not meant to scare us. The signs of times are not meant to scare us. They're meant to prepare us and to send us. And we see this in 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians chapter 5. This is where I get into what our mission is as a church. It's pretty simple. It's just to introduce people to Jesus. That's it. It might be inviting them to church. It might be sitting down and having a spiritual conversation with them. It might be doing a Bible study with them. Our responsibility, a Christian, every single Christian, is to just introduce people to Jesus. Every person that you have a relationship with, this is biblical truth. Every relationship you have is not an accident. Every relationship you have is on purpose for the purpose of introducing that person to Jesus. Every single one. Whether you like the person or not, whether you get along with them or not, whether they're a good employee or not, whether they're a good boss or not, whether they're a good friend at school or whether they're your frenemy. Whatever it is, And so with that, Paul wanted us to be ready. And this is how he said to be ready. Look at verse 18. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 18. Everything is from God, even the relationships you have. Every relationship is from God, who has reconciled us to himself through Christ and has given us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God has reconciled the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, and he has committed the message of reconciliation to us. Let me just stop right there and kind of piece this together for us, okay? If the end is near and every relationship we have been given is from God, he says that God has given you and I the ministry of reconciliation. Okay, I'm going to get into a little bit of a weed here, but follow with me. In Ephesians 4, Paul says that pastors and ministry leaders, their job is not to do ministry. I know, surprising. Our job is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. Am I a Christian? Yes. So I need to be being prepared to do ministry. And do I do ministry? Absolutely. But every single one of us that call ourselves a Christian are ministers. We have the ministry of reconciliation to God, of helping people reconcile their relationship with God. Your job as a bride is to help people reconcile their relationship with God. The word reconcile means to restore a relationship, specifically with God, by helping them exchange their old life into something new and better, so that they can begin to prepare for the groom to arrive. It's not rocket science. It's not difficult to understand. It's just really hard sometimes to just do it. But God initiated reconciliation through Jesus, and then Jesus looked at us and said, now it's your job. He says this. He's committed to us the message of reconciliation. Look at verse 20. So the first thing we do is to minister to others. Our first responsibility, if you want to be ready, start ministering to others. Minister to the people God has put in your life. If you're a parent, your kids are there on purpose. Minister to them. Don't wait for Sundays for them to be ministered to. If you have a job and you're going to work tomorrow, the people you are working with, they're not just your work friends. God has given you the job to help them reconcile, because his time is coming, and it's going to be awful if they don't know who the groom is. Look at verse 20. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ. Since God is making his appeal through us, we plead on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. The second thing we are to do is to represent Jesus to others. Represent Jesus to others. You see, ambassadors back then were highly, they had a lot of authority. They were highly respected. They carried a message, and they carried the ability to bring peace between two different groups of people. And so Paul is very intentionally giving us that role of being an ambassador for Christ. We represent Jesus. Our words and our actions show people Jesus or some other kind of Jesus that isn't Jesus. The way we treat people, the way we talk about people, even if we don't think they're hearing it, we are either representing Jesus or something else that's not Jesus. We are an ambassador by words and actions. This is one of the deepest responsibilities we have as a Christian, is to be an ambassador to the people around us of Christ. Because our goal, what Christ has given us, is to reconcile people with God, to help them know how they can reconcile their relationship with him. So, let me wrap up with this thought. Let's go back to the bridesmaids. Are we the wise ones or the foolish ones? Are we the ones preparing or the ones who aren't prepared? You see, the idea of being a Christian is not that we're just some passive recipient of salvation. In fact, I could argue, you might need to question whether you really are saved or not. Maybe you've gone through the motions, but you really aren't acting on it. You're not doing the things God, nothing's changed. You said the thing or you did the thing, you dunked in the tank, you did all the stuff, but something just, life, you haven't been changed. You're still doing the same stuff you were doing 5, 10 years ago, 5 weeks ago, 10 weeks ago. I'm not saying you're not a Christian, but are you being prepared? Are you one of the 5 wise brides, or one of the bridesmaids, or one of the 5 foolish bridesmaids? Christians are called to be active in their mission and reconcile people to God. That's done through our actions and our words. The groom is coming. The end is near, and we're going to dig into it a lot more over the next few weeks. It's going to be awesome. But I want to remind you that this isn't meant to scare you. It's meant to prepare you and send you. The groom is coming. So let's just introduce people to Jesus.